The challenge presented. The Grand Assembly Hall of Nexus Station hummed with the voices of 1,000 different species. Suspended in the neutral territory of deep space, this massive artificial construct served as the political and cultural center of the Galactic Coalition, a loose alliance of spacefaring civilizations that had maintained peace across 3 spiral arms for over 12 millennia. Humanity had only been part of this cosmic community for 7 years. Earth's development of viable FTL travel had triggered the standard first contact protocols, and humans were granted provisional membership status, the galactic equivalent of a learner's permit. Ambassador Marcus Chen stood at the edge of the human delegation's platform, trying not to fidget with his formal attire as he observed the proceedings. The annual solstice trials were about to begin, a prestigious competition where various species demonstrated their problem-solving capabilities through increasingly difficult challenges. Success in the trials carried considerable political weight in coalition decisions. "Don't look so nervous," whispered Dr. Eliza Reyes, who stood beside him. At 34, she was Earth's foremost expert in quantum topology and multidimensional mathematics. With her cropped black hair and perpetually curious eyes, she had the demeanor of someone who found puzzles far more interesting than people. "They're just aliens with fancy chairs." Marcus couldn't help but smile. "Those fancy chairs determine resource allocation for 17 star systems, including ours. We need to make a good impression." The Orvelians, who had developed a reputation as the Coalition's premier puzzle makers, took center stage. Their species resembled tall, slender humanoids with iridescent skin that shifted colors with their emotions. Currently, they displayed confident shades of gold and amber. High Engineer Talus, the lead Orvelian, raised all 4 of his arms for silence. "Esteemed members of the Coalition, we present this cycle's ultimate challenge, the Quantum Nexus Maze." Behind him, a holographic projection appeared, a swirling, hyperdimensional construct of light and geometry that seemed to fold in upon itself in ways that hurt the eyes. "The Nexus Maze operates on principles of quantum probability and temporal recursion," Talus explained. "It constantly reconfigures based on the solver's approach, ensuring no single strategy remains viable. Even our most accomplished minds require a minimum of 24 standard hours to navigate its complexity." A murmur spread through the assembly hall. The solstice trials typically featured challenges that could be completed within hours, not days. "We have designated this the 24-hour challenge," Talus continued, "as that represents the average completion time among advanced Coalition species." His skin flickered briefly to a dismissive blue as his gaze settled on the human delegation. "Newer members may observe, but are not expected to participate in this advanced trial." The condescension wasn't subtle. Since joining the Coalition, humans had been consistently underestimated. Despite significant contributions in theoretical physics and computational biology, Earth was still considered a curiosity rather than a serious member. Marcus felt his jaw tighten but maintained his diplomatic composure. "Thank you for the consideration, High Engineer. However, humanity would like to accept the challenge." Talus's skin rippled with orange surprise. "Ambassador Chen, with all respect, your species lacks the neurological development for quantum temporal cognition. The maze would be overwhelming." "Perhaps," Marcus conceded, "but we would still like the opportunity to try." A moment of uncomfortable silence followed before the Orvelian nodded. "As is your right. Who will represent Earth in this endeavor?" Before Marcus could respond, Eliza stepped forward. "I will." Marcus turned to her with wide eyes. "Eliza, are you sure? We don't need to prove anything today." "Yes, we do," she replied quietly. Then louder, "Dr. Eliza Reyes, Earth Delegation. I accept the challenge." Talus's skin cycled through several colors before settling on a patronizing shade of violet. "Very well. The observation chamber will be prepared. You may begin in 1 standard hour." He paused. "For your comfort, you may withdraw at any time without shame." As the assembly dispersed to prepare for the event, The human delegation gathered around Eliza. "That was impulsive," Dr. Omar Patel, the delegation's senior scientist, said with concern. "The Orwellians aren't exaggerating. Their puzzles are legendary." Eliza shrugged. "So is human stubbornness. Besides, I've been studying Orwellian puzzle theory since we joined the coalition. Their approaches are brilliant, but predictable." "Predictable?" Marcus asked. "They're considered the greatest puzzle makers in 3 spiral arms." "Exactly," Eliza said, her eyes lighting up. "They've been unchallenged for so long they've developed blind spots. They value elegant, symmetrical solutions, what they call harmonic reasoning. But sometimes the messiest path is the most efficient." An hour later, Eliza stood before the entrance to the challenge chamber. The transparent walls allowed observers to see the participant, but not the puzzle itself, which existed partially in dimensions only visible to the solver. The observation gallery had filled with curious aliens from dozens of species. Most had come to witness what they assumed would be a humbling experience for the upstart humans. High Engineer Tallis approached with a final word of caution. "Dr. Rice, the Nexus maze will strain your cognitive faculties beyond anything your species has experienced. The record for fastest completion is 22 standard hours by Grandmaster Zilnox of the Arcturian Collective." Eliza nodded politely. "I'll do my best." "Your vital signs will be monitored," Tallis added. "Should you experience dangerous levels of stress, we will extract you immediately." "That won't be necessary," she replied with quiet confidence. Tallis's skin flickered with skepticism as he gestured toward the entrance. "Then let the challenge begin." Eliza stepped through the threshold and found herself surrounded by cascading patterns of light and mathematical equations. The quantum nexus maze manifested as a multidimensional construct, part physical space, part information system. Equations and geometric patterns swirled around her, constantly shifting and reconfiguring. Probability waves collapsed and reformed with each movement she made. Information flooded her senses: spatial relationships, quantum fluctuations, temporal recursion loops, all interconnected and constantly rearranging themselves. For a moment, she stood motionless, absorbing the scope of the challenge. Then, a small smile played across her lips. "Interesting," she whispered. "Very interesting." In the observation gallery, Tallis turned to Ambassador Chen. "Your representative seems remarkably calm. Most first-time solvers experience significant disorientation." Marcus nodded, hiding his own surprise. Dr. Rice has always had a unique relationship with complex systems. Inside the chamber, Eliza had begun to move. Her hands traced patterns in the air as she navigated through the swirling information. She wasn't following any recognizable problem-solving protocol. Sometimes moving forward, sometimes backward, occasionally standing completely still with her eyes closed. "What is she doing?" one of the Arcturian observers asked. "That's not standard maze navigation." Inside the chamber, Eliza had recognized something fundamental about the Nexus maze that its creators hadn't anticipated. The puzzle operated on principles of quantum superposition. Every possible solution existed simultaneously until the solver's approach collapsed these possibilities into a single outcome. But where most species methodically calculated each potential pathway, Eliza began to use a distinctly human approach, intuition combined with chaotic thinking. She started solving different sections of the maze simultaneously, using both logical deduction and intuitive leaps. Her hands moved rapidly across the interface, sometimes solving problems before fully understanding why her solution worked. In the observation gallery, murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd as monitoring screens showed her unprecedented progress. "Impossible," Tallis muttered, his skin flashing alarmed yellows and reds. "She's completed the first phase already. Her approach is completely unstructured," another Orwellian observer noted with confusion. "She's not following any standard problem-solving methodology." Tallis stared at the monitors, his color deepening to a troubled purple. "Increase the difficulty." She must be exploiting a flaw in the system. The chamber shimmered as the puzzle's complexity multiplied exponentially. Eliza paused momentarily, then her smile widened. She had already anticipated this adaptation. Unexpected solution. The observation gallery had grown silent as aliens of all species watched in disbelief. What had begun as a patronizing courtesy to the humans had transformed into something unprecedented. Dr. Eliza Rice wasn't just attempting the quantum nexus maze. She was blazing through it at a pace that defied explanation. 27 minutes, announced the automated monitoring system. Phase 2 completed. High engineer Talus's skin had paled to an ashen gray, the Orwellian equivalent of shocked disbelief. That's not possible. The neural calculations alone should take hours. Ambassador Chen couldn't hide his own surprise. What exactly is she doing in there? An Arcturian observer, whose species prided themselves on their analytical abilities, leaned forward with intense interest. She appears to be guessing. Guessing? Talus nearly choked on the word. No one guesses their way through a quantum nexus maze. Not random guessing, the Arcturian clarified. She's using some form of intuitive pattern recognition. She's seeing connections without performing the full calculations. Inside the chamber, Eliza had discovered something critical about the maze's construction. The Orwellians had designed it assuming that any solver would approach it sequentially, methodically working through each probability branch before moving to the next. It was an assumption so fundamental that no one had ever questioned it. But humans didn't always think sequentially. Eliza was approaching the maze holistically, seeing the entire system at once rather than as discrete parts. Where other species saw a complex series of individual problems, she recognized an interconnected whole. She began to solve portions of the maze simultaneously, working backwards from presumed solutions while also advancing forward from established starting points. It was chaotic, inelegant, and stunningly effective. The third phase of the maze introduced temporal elements, solutions that required precise timing and sequencing. Most species needed hours to map the temporal fluctuations. Eliza simply began tapping out a rhythm with her foot, using her innate human sense of timing to navigate the temporal shifts instinctively. In the gallery, the Orwellian observers huddled together in urgent conference. "She's exploiting a fundamental weakness in the design," one whispered urgently. "No," Talus responded after a moment of contemplation, his skin slowly shifting to a thoughtful blue. "She's solving it as designed, just not as we anticipated." The Arcturian observer nodded. The human brain evolved differently than ours. They developed pattern recognition and intuitive leaping as survival mechanisms. They don't always need to understand why something works to recognize that it does. Talus turned to Ambassador Chen. "Is this common among your species?" Marcus considered the question. "We call it intuition. Some humans have it more strongly than others, but yes, it's a fundamental aspect of how we think." Inside the chamber, Eliza had reached the final phase, the so-called paradox lock that had stumped even the most brilliant coalition minds for hours. It presented multiple contradictory conditions that needed to be satisfied simultaneously. Eliza studied the pulsing geometric patterns for several minutes. Then, instead of attempting to resolve the paradox, she simply accepted it. She input commands that acknowledged both conditions as true, despite their apparent contradiction. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the entire maze shimmered and collapsed into a single point of light before expanding outward in a harmonious display of mathematical perfection. The puzzle had been solved. The chamber's automated system chimed softly. Challenge complete. Total time: 46 minutes and 12 seconds. Complete silence fell over the observation gallery, broken only when someone dropped a datapad with a clatter. Eliza emerged from the chamber looking slightly tired but pleased. She brushed a strand of hair from her face and glanced around at the stunned audience. "That was fascinating," she said to no one in particular. "The temporal recursion principles alone are revolutionary. Have you considered applications in predictive modeling?" High Engineer Talus approached slowly, his skin cycling through colors so rapidly it appeared almost white. 46 minutes, he said quietly. The previous record was 22 hours. Eliza shrugged. The puzzle rewards linear thinking, but reality isn't always linear. Sometimes you need to embrace contradiction. You accepted paradoxical conditions as simultaneously true, Talus said. That's not how logical problem-solving works, isn't it? Eliza smiled. Quantum mechanics itself is built on paradox. Particles exist in multiple states until observed. I just applied the same principle to your puzzle. The Arcturian observer had joined them. Remarkable. You didn't solve the paradox. You transcended it. News of the human achievement spread through Nexus Station like a shockwave. Within hours, the Coalition Council had convened an emergency session. The implications were profound. A species previously dismissed as primitive had demonstrated problem-solving capabilities that surpassed the established powers. Ambassador Chen found himself suddenly in high demand, fielding meeting requests from species that had previously ignored the human delegation entirely. You've created quite a stir, he told Eliza as they prepared for the council session. The Orvelians are submitting a formal recommendation to upgrade Earth's membership status immediately. Eliza seemed more interested in her datapad than the political ramifications. That's nice. I've been analyzing the maze's structure. The quantum temporal interface they've developed could revolutionize our approach to computational modeling. Marcus laughed. You've just reshaped humanity's position in interstellar politics, and you're thinking about research applications. Politics changes, she replied with a shrug. Good mathematics is eternal. The council chamber was packed when they arrived. Species from across the coalition had gathered to witness this unexpected shift in the galactic order. High Engineer Talus, now serving as the Orvelian representative to the council, called for attention. Esteemed members of the coalition, he began, his skin now a respectful gold. Today we witnessed something unprecedented. Dr. Eliza Rise of Earth completed the quantum nexus maze in 46 minutes, a feat that redefines our understanding of cognitive problem-solving. Murmurs spread through the chamber. For generations, the Orvelian conclave has prided itself on creating challenges that test the limits of rational thought. We assumed that methodical, sequential reasoning was the pinnacle of intellectual evolution. His skin shifted to a humble shade of blue. Dr. Reyes has demonstrated otherwise. He turned toward the human delegation. The human approach. This intuition, combined with logical reasoning, represents a cognitive pathway we had not fully appreciated. It is neither better nor worse than our own methods, but fundamentally different and valuable. The Arcturian representative stood next. We propose an immediate establishment of a joint research initiative, with humans as equal partners, to explore these complementary approaches to problem-solving. One by one, representatives from various species rose to offer support for the initiative. Species that had previously dismissed humans as primitives now spoke of cognitive diversity and evolutionary advantages. As Ambassador Chen signed the formal agreements, he glanced at Eliza, who was deep in conversation with a group of Orvelian and Arcturian scientists, already sketching equations on a shared datapad. You know, Marcus commented to a nearby counselor, we humans have a saying, the shortest distance between 2 points is not always a straight line. The counselor, a crystalline entity from the Rigel system, vibrated in their equivalent of confusion. That contradicts basic geometric principles. Marcus smiled. Exactly. And sometimes, embracing contradiction is the path to new understanding. Later that evening, as the human delegation celebrated their unexpected diplomatic victory, Eliza stood apart, gazing out at the stars through Nexus Station's observation dome. High Engineer Talus approached, his skin now a thoughtful shade of purple. Dr. Rice, I must confess something. The quantum nexus maze was partially designed to demonstrate the limitations of younger species, to teach humility. Eliza nodded. I suspected as much. No puzzle exists without purpose. Yet it was we who learned humility today. Talus continued. Your species has been part of the galactic community for merely 7 years. Mine has been designing puzzles for 7,000. How did you see what we could not? Eliza considered the question. Human history is filled with problems we shouldn't have been able to solve, from fire to flight to faster-than-light travel. We've never had the luxury of perfect knowledge or unlimited time. We had to develop shortcuts, intuitive leaps, creative thinking, embracing paradox. She turned to face him. Your puzzles are beautiful, high engineer, perfect and elegant. But the universe itself is messy, contradictory, and full of shortcuts. Perhaps the greatest puzzle is learning which rules can be bent and which must be followed. Talus's skin shifted to a deep, respectful blue. I believe, Dr. Rice, that this is the beginning of a most enlightening partnership. As the stars wheeled slowly overhead, human and alien stood together, contemplating the infinite puzzles that awaited them both.